Hey, fellow patriots, I'm Bree.
And I'm Blaze. Some call me Pa. It has been said that we have 4 boxes to keep ourselves free. These are the soap box, the ballot box, the jury box, and the ammo box.
And we are the 4th box. We are here to arm you with enough information, resources, and skills to take back your freedom, increase your self-sufficiency, and inspire you to join in the fight against tyranny.
Thomas Jefferson said, "Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty." Thank you for joining us and for joining in this fight.
Welcome back to the 4th box. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another week at the 4th box. Happy to be back once again to discuss all of the madness that is going on in the world. It somehow never ceases to amaze me how every week it is worse than it was the week before, and I keep thinking it can't get worse than this, and it does. And this is not the first time I've said that, and it will not be the last. So before we get too far into the weeds for this episode, I'm going to turn it over to Pops to get us started with his toast. And I think this week I might actually be doing the quote, so a little bit of a change up. But Pops, why don't you go ahead and get us started with the toast on your side?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks. Greetings, 4th Box Patriots. We here are coming to you again from the virtual Buckman Tavern. It's a place that patriots gather. And for those that have not yet heard, Buckman Tavern is that historical place on the Lexington Green where those great American patriots gathered. And that most famous morning, April 19th, 1775, where the shot heard round the world, the morning after one of those meetings at the Buckman Tavern. So we consider ourselves as 4th Box podcasters coming to you from the virtual Buckman Tavern. We're very excited tonight to introduce our guest. We're also excited to talk about and to present 2 new features to the show. And the first is going to be, since we're entering into, or a couple of months into, the 250th anniversary of the founding of this country, we're going to try to recall some historical events related to that time 250 years ago. So tonight is my toast. I'm raising my Scotch whiskey to a new story that I found here recently. On March 3rd, 1776, 250 years ago, Commodore Essex Hopkins of the new U.S. Continental Navy sailed to the Bohemian island of New Providence. He commanded a small fleet hastily assembled and sailing under the American flag. The target was the British garrison at the port of Nassau and the military supplies stored therein. Nassau was only lightly defended, and Hopkins, with a force of roughly 200 Americans, captured 24 casks of gunpowder, 103 military artillery pieces, and significant other war-making provisions, all without a single loss of American life. It was the first amphibious assault by the brand new U.S. Navy. Sailing with Hopkins were 2 men who would become maritime legends of the Revolution: Samuel Nicholas, the founder of the United States Marine Corps, and John Paul Jones, the father of the U.S. Navy. What I found even more interesting, there is another group of revolutionary naval heroes who should also be remembered, who did more to win our nation's independence than Nicholas and Jones combined. Their story is seldom told, perhaps because they never served in uniform, never obtained an officer's rank, and never swore an oath of allegiance to the U.S. government. These were the men the British called American pirates. Even though the Crown knew better, more accurately, they were privateers, manning ships licensed by the fledgling government of the eastern seaboard to attack British shipping. They sailed for coin as well as country, entitled to a share of anything they could capture. It was an enticing proposition. Fortunes could be won if the wind was right, the captain brave, and the crew willing. An estimated 1,700 ships and boats joined this multifarious armada. They came in all shapes and sizes, ranging from the 100-foot-long Caesar, which hailed from Boston and carried a crew of 200 men, to the lightly manned 28-foot whaleboats that prowled Long Island Sound. The fleet came to dwarf the U.S. Navy, which outfitted a total of 65 vessels over the entire course of the war. So 1,700 private vessels were used to harass the British and interfere with their maritime efforts to get supplies to the forces here in country. And it's a story I had never heard before. I think it is certainly worth mentioning. And at the very least, I'll raise a snort of whiskey for those fellers that did that mighty deed. Cheers.
Okay, yeah. Cheers. I like this idea of cheersing some historical folks. I think that will inspire, maybe, hopefully, some people today to, call to mind that same courage and bravery that it took back in the day that we seem to be lacking so much now.
Yeah, for sure. So we're going to, as we go through the rest of the months of this year, in particular around the 4th of July and those weeks during the very historical events, we're going to try to dig up some obscure historical facts related to the revolutionary times and bring them into the show for this year.
Cool. Yeah, I like it. I think that's a good plan.
Okay.
Would you like me to take it right into the quote from there?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right, cool. I think this will be quite fitting. The quote that I have is most often attributed to George Orwell. Whether or not he's the first one to have actually said it, who knows? But I think it's most fitting for what we see going on around us today. And that is that all tyrannies rule through fraud and force, but once the fraud is exposed, they must rely exclusively on force. And we are and have been in an awakening for quite a while. We've said that time and time again. And I know sometimes you're not quite convinced because your generation isn't so inclined to open their eyes to the things that have been going on. But it is increasingly clear that more and more people are waking up to the truth of what is and has been going on in our country and around the globe for a long time. And because of that, it is requiring more forceful tactics from those in power. And I think that's why we're seeing so much of what we have been seeing, including, but not limited to, the most recent strikes in Iran from us and from Israel. But I know we've got a lot to get into with all that. So without divulging more, I am going to pass it back to you to kind of introduce what we're going to be doing for tonight's episode. But before we do that, let's bring Andy into the show. What's up, Andy? We're super happy to have you joining us here. We're going to let you do a little intro, or Pops, maybe you're going to do Andy's intro. I don't know, but either way, we're happy to have you.
Yeah, I'm going to just make a couple of points, and then Andy can further elaborate on that as much as he would like. You mentioned your generation, and we're certainly very happy to have another person from your generation, so to speak, to be joining us here in the studio tonight to talk about how some of these things are affecting you guys in particular, and how you guys, the younger people, are reacting to them. So Andy comes to us as a lifelong resident of Elk County, Pennsylvania, right here where we're at. He is a trade school trained welder. He is also a work associate of mine. His family has a long history of coal mining and logging, both of which were prevalent industries in this area. He is also, with his wife, or his fiance, the father of two young daughters. And I'm very happy to have met both of those kids that come by the shop every once in a while. So, Andy, anything else to say about yourself before we get to the next feature of tonight's show?
I think that was perfect. Over the years, you and I have had many long conversations about goings on in the world. And I think before you even started this podcast years back, I had mentioned, Blaze, when you retire, you really should think of getting these thoughts out, however it happens, to the public. And, I was very delighted to find out that, Bree, you had a passion for this, and you were also a great speaker yourself, and took it to the point where it is now, where you have these conversations and wonderful guests, and you're getting the information out and really kind of embodying Blaze's old saying of, the 4 boxes, and really bringing the fourth box, which is the arming of information to the people. And I think it's wonderful. It's turned out wonderful.
Well, we certainly appreciate those kind words, and we are very excited to have you here tonight. And as part of that, I'm going to introduce the next new feature that we have for the show. We're going to bring this out every so often, and we're pretty excited about it. We call it the Ricochet Round, and Andy is going to be our first person to go through this with us. So what we're going to do is introduce some words that I think everybody will recognize as something tied to significant events of the day. And we're going to go down through them, and we're going to see where the conversation goes. We can talk about each one as long or as short as we would like. So to begin that process tonight, Andy, I'm going to throw out the word Iran. Country of Iran.
The country of Iran. Well, we have the current conflict unfolding before us. And actually, this conflict goes back very, very far. As you know, there was a list mentioned by supposedly leaked, where Bibi mentioned several bad actors in the Middle East that needed to be removed. And Iran is actually the last country on that list that we weren't sure if we were ever going to get around to taking care of. But with the Trump administration being so beholden to the wealthy Zionist elite, I'm not very surprised that even though it has a 27% and maybe a bit more percent approval rating as a course of action in the United States at the moment, that we are still moving ahead. And I think we're trying to get this accomplished quicker than what will more than likely be possible.
Yeah, Bree, you want to follow up with anything? You want me to jump in?
Well, I'll just jump in right off the bat and say, thank you for immediately calling attention to the fact that there are other players in this game, and we are not just jumping into this conflict with Iran because we think, maybe there's nuclear weapons and it's a threat to America. I certainly don't think the people in power here feel that way. I know that there are citizens who truly believe that's all this is. And, Pops, those people are in your generation, frankly. I don't think there are any young people who are buying these lies. I think we all see it for what Andy just said that it is. It's Israel's fight. If you can even call it that, it's an agenda they have been trying to finalize for a long, long time. This has deep, old roots. And this year, more than ever, we just see how much we are under the thumb of Netanyahu and everyone else that is part of this Zionist cult, because that's what it is. And I think that people were suspicious of this for a long time, but the more that happens, the more that unfolds, the more we're seeing it. So
for a long time, they have said the clock, it is like a striking clock at this point. And when you can predict very accurately what's going to happen next, as so many doomsayers have said before on these various agendas, whether it be the Western European elite and their agenda for Russia, or the Zionist elite and their agenda for the Middle East, every step seems to happen just as it was foretold. There's not much mixture into these events that go on. And if that doesn't make you turn your head and quite easily start to see the pattern, you might be thoroughly propagandized.
Well, I think that's something we would all agree on, especially related to my generation and let's say 50s plus. Because I think many of those are standing here cheerleading. It just makes my skin crawl when I hear somebody out at the grocery store or at the tap room somewhere talking about, how great it is. We're over there kicking these guys' ass and all this. It just makes my skin crawl, because these are the same people that I believe voted for Trump in the first place because he promised to be the peacetime president, no regime change efforts, none of these things. And now when he's in there, the same screws that have influenced every presidential administration since John F. Kennedy are being applied, and now we're finding ourselves into a war which they can stand up there and pound the drums all they want, like we're over there kicking their ass, but it's a lot like it was in Iraq. And if you ever remembered Scott Ritter as one of the nuclear weapons inspectors from back in those days, he's projecting that we're not getting done half of what they're telling us, and that always goes that way. The fog of war is always presented by those that are orchestrating the thing, and they're always presented to try to keep the thing in favorable light politically. So I think it's terrible. I think the big threat is to you guys your age and younger, because if this thing escalates and spills out of the borders it's currently in, it's going to mean boots on the ground, and then we know there's going to even be more loss of life, this should have never happened. Further comments? Everybody pretty good on that one, or you want to move along?
If Andy doesn't have something to jump in with, I will just follow up quickly in saying that at a bar the other day, Fox News was on, and this is one of those things where it's the classic right, left, whatever. Everybody gets sucked into their side, and they think this is what my side thinks, so this is what I think, and there's so many people who think Fox News is on the right side of all this, and it's like, I didn't even hear the whole thing. I didn't even want to listen. I was annoyed to even be seeing the conversation happening, but the guy basically said, this is a revitalization of American patriotism. That was how he was describing our efforts in Iran, and meanwhile, we've already had, 4 Americans killed there?
I think it's 6 now.
Yeah. Okay, 6. And he's describing that as the revitalization of American patriotism? No, sir, that is so backwards. It makes my skin crawl. That is not what American patriotism is. And the fact that so many people will turn to the side of the mainstream media that they think is the right side and be convinced that that is reality is so deeply concerning. And it goes right back to the conversations we've been having about Epstein and everything else, that people are so still embroiled with their team that they are not seeing through to the big picture. But again, that our battle is not there. We're never going to get through to those people. It was something I had to just call attention to because it was so maddening to listen to somebody say this.
Well, it's encouraging to me that if, say, 40-somethings and younger are not listening to any of the bullshit that's been spoon-fed to us by the legacy media for the last 100 years. They're all owned by the same people that own our congressmen, and they're all up there cheering on another war, and the bankers are giddy with glee because they're going to get collect all kind of money funding both sides of this thing like they always do. And it's just unfortunate that my generation has been so asleep at the wheel that we are handing off this very condition to you guys. It makes me sick.
The propaganda is too thorough. The older generation was just so brought up, and probably was to some degree brought up in a trusted or a reliable government. Our grandfathers were arguably, our great grandfathers were simple men that worked hard to give us the best world they could. But in great power came great holes that very sick individuals filled in time. And at this point, people still believe that the moral cause truly is the cause for why we do most of the actions we do. And the propaganda can't be propaganda because it makes so much sense that we're doing these things for noble goals. But when you boil down these movements one after the other, one decision by our government after the other, you start to see that there really is no moral, there is no real moral consideration for most of the moves we do. And I don't know if that's the conscious decision by these people, or if when an organization gets so big that the only thing that makes the wheel turn is the most financially beneficial decision at any given nexus of conflict or whatever, what have you.
Yeah, it is really difficult to parse out what the overall motivation would be. But Bree and I have talked about it many times. We think ultimately this very elite small group that kind of orchestrates these global moves is interested in depopulation, It's interested in a slave class of people that will be here basically working for the benefit of the few, and the rest can be expended one way or another, whether it be through the propagation of disease or war or both. But we kind of think that those are some of the goals. They've been stated as some of the goals. So, when you see these conflicts that are being stirred up and it doesn't really appear to be necessary or make good sense, you think back to those things that they've suggested they want to decrease the global population by more than half or more than 2/3. And ultimately, they want to have a bunch of worker bees left that are just here taking care of the mundane things that none of those people themselves are going to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think we could talk on that one all night, but I'm okay to move on to the next one.
Okay, I'm going to drop this one on you, then I'm going to step by. I'm going to let Andy start making some remarks, and this is going to be Minneapolis. Go ahead, Andy.
The current events in Minneapolis, and I believe that would be related to the deportations and the ICE involvement, or the ICE actions in Minneapolis, I think is what the topic would lean towards. Obviously, this is another case where innocent folks are caught in the crossfire of what is ultimately a move on the chessboard. The I was having a conversation with my more left-leaning coworker, and he said, "Do you think these men that are doing these he obviously thinks very little of ICE, and he said, do you think these men will ever face repercussions for what they're doing in this, more or less like the Nazis did at Nuremberg or something to that effect?" And I said, well, who would prosecute them? Who would have any interest in holding these men's feet to the fire? It's, at the end of the day, once again, the moral issue doesn't really matter that much here. It is the pure and unemotional goal that has to be accomplished in this case, the Trump administration's decision, and probably related to Israel and many other prominent donors in America, which is the mass deportation of illegal immigrants. I can't see any serious moral consideration for the people that are being deported. I also don't think they really care too much about ICE themselves and the men that they get to carry these tasks out.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to jump in. So,
Yeah.
The whole immigration issue. Here, if you want any more, the whole immigration issue we know has been presented by both sides as a magical fundraising campaign prop. And as McCarthy, former Speaker of the House, representative from California, said publicly to candidates running at state level office, we really don't want to fix the because it is such a boon to campaign fundraising on both sides. Both sides of the political aisle have allowed it to go on and then reacted. It's kind of like the war on drugs. It's one of those things that gets basically funded by the U.S. government, and then we fund the pretentious effort to stop it.
Absolutely.
So I think the term Minneapolis. I wanted to see where Andy wanted to go with that. Obviously, constitutionally speaking, there is a federal government requirement to secure the border through the naturalization clause. It can become a political football when we have it made a political divisive issue when it shouldn't be, as nothing on the Constitution should be politically divisive. If there's something on there that you want to change, then you work from your side to change it. But other than that, the federal government's only responsibility is to uphold those few obligations that were delegated to it, and naturalization is one. So the second part of that, from my perspective, is the people promoting the tumultuous behavior, the rioting and all that, they want some people to be killed. This does more for their effort than anything else. They get a couple of martyrs. They're going to get a lot more attention. They're going to get a lot more people interested in it. And ultimately, what I believe, as we mentioned on the last point, that very small group of elites recognizes that America has to fall before they can achieve global dominance in a one world order, one world currency, all that. America has to get out of the way. This is just one of those tools, like the drug thing, to help get America out of the way. You sow discord amongst the population, you cause these riots, you get all this division, and we are much easier to control under those circumstances. And I think they want that to be a tool to help erode the stability of this country and get us out of the way.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that there's a lot of considerations there for sure. Obviously, we know that this is something that falls within the jurisdiction of the federal government in the Constitution. We know that. We've been over that. Blah, blah, blah. And it's important, sure, but it's not really the highlight of this conversation, because we also know that we have been deporting illegals forever in every administration. It doesn't matter if it's a Democrat or Republican in office. We're always deporting mass numbers of people. We always have been. Trump, even he hasn't even really deported that many people, all things considered. And so when we look at what's going on in Minneapolis and we look at the violence that's going on there, we know it's connected to something deeper and bigger, because if these people were rioting about only that, they would have been rioting, 4 years ago and 12 years ago and 20 years ago. And it's not that. And if you remember, after the Charlie Kirk assassination, one thing that I said was that, and this was very early, this is when we had no information about all of the absolute nonsense that's gone on with that whole thing. But I said right away that if this follows with people on the other side being killed in any capacity, we'll know that this is all just manipulated and staged to some degree. I'm not saying that like people didn't really die, but I'm saying like it was not an accident. And I think that this is kind of that. I think we're seeing the other side of that. We have to kill somebody on this side, then we have to kill somebody on that side, so that we rile people up on both sides. So now people are feeling that tension because they feel like somebody on their team died. They feel like they lost somebody. And so when we rally a whole percentage of the American population around one cause, and then we kill off that person that they're tied to, or a person that they're tied to that's part of that cause, it's going to create a strong emotional response. And that's what we're seeing. This is all like a psychological ploy to impact how we now react to everything else that comes, everything that is to follow. And not only that, but as much as it is a constitutional responsibility, the whole ICE thing happening in Minneapolis, I don't know if we know how deep that is going. I'm not an anti-ICE person. I'm not. I think we should be deporting illegals. However, we also know that they're bringing in a ton of people quickly. I doubt they're getting a lot of training, and they're rolling out AI surveillance and things like Palantir tech to help track these people down. I mean, this is a perfect storm for chaos. Like, this is not a good system for doing it the right way.
And you're absolutely right. And it's always turned upon you at some point. Whatever we unleash upon our domestic enemies, at least, always seems to be turned back upon you, as is the case with the Patriot Act. I mean, your entire life, if you have any contact with anybody overseas or go on a trip anywhere overseas, the Patriot Act allows your personal information to be totally open and available to the whatever agents of the government should ever decide to violate your privacy at that point. I mean, there are many loopholes and nasty laws and violations of your humanity that were passed and approved by the American public in the effort to fight terrorism. And here we are once again with, however much we agree that illegals should be deported, with ICE more or less acting in a, if they were to act this way against American citizens, you would make the comparison that they were no different than the Gestapo or any other tyrannical domestic military force. but they're doing their legal duty as of yet. But it still does, in my opinion, set a precedent, and most of these actions should always be monitored with extreme scrutiny, because what you accept today, turned upon your enemies, will inevitably be turned upon you.
That's
Yeah.
excellent.
Bingo.
One
Yeah.
of the things we've always said here on the podcast when there's been similar events is we don't believe that anybody should be dying in the hands of our law enforcement at local, state, or federal level. That is not their job. They are supposed to be protecting and preserving life at all costs, at the risk of their own. At the risk of their own. So there should not be people dying at the hands. Yeah, there should be. We should be exporting, we're getting people out of here that don't belong here, and all the rest of it. The other curious point to that is, why is it Minneapolis again?
Yeah.
The whole George Floyd flare up was Minneapolis. Now we got this thing going in Minneapolis. Just really curious to me. Is this a spot where they want things? Do they want to be addressing the heartland and spreading up? I really don't know the tactical reason, but there is a reason that it's in Minneapolis. I just don't quite understand what all the components are that made that up. But there's big cities all over the country that have large influxes of immigrants from different parts of the world, and it's been Minneapolis now the last couple of times. It's just a little curious.
I'm sure over time we'll come to find in disclosed CIA documents, 70 years from now, that they had a very active cell in Minneapolis for the last 20 years in American history, which is why this continues to pop up, which is largely how their disclosed documents seem to go. When they decide to spring into action in a certain area and set up a great base of operation, a lot of strange events seem to boil up around those places. But conjecture on my part.
Yeah, well, that's all right. We get into that as well. All right, let's move on to the next. We're going to shift gears a little bit here. I hope I say it right. Glyphosate.
Glyphosate, the very harmful agricultural chemical that is apparently being given a bit of a PR boost, which, to my knowledge, prior to the election, was rising as a very harmful chemical that we should be aware of, and all of a sudden now it's getting its facelift. I'm not sure where the money came in for that. I've got to do my own bit of due diligence to backtrack why we're repackaging glyphosate.
I think we're all scratching our head. Bree, I know you're anxious to jump in on this one.
Well, yeah, this is a huge one. I mean, a lot of people would give a lot of credit to RFK Jr. and Maha for Trump getting into office at all. So for him to turn around and put an executive order into place that then says we need glyphosate for national security reasons, and we're going to continue to use it on our crops, is one, not only a betrayal to his voter base, which is one of many, many, many that we've seen so far, but it also goes against the very things that he was saying of his own accord. Back in the first time he ran for office, he was very much on board with the fact that this is something that we should not be quite literally poisoning our entire food supply and much of our water supply inherently with. And now we've seen a complete and total 360 on his stance with it. There's really no explanation for that other than that he's MK Ultra'd, or it's just a clone and it's not the real Trump, because that's how off base we are with all the things he said was going to happen versus what's actually happening.
Yeah. But do you see that theme come up time and time again with many of these very staunch figures that came up during the Trump election, like Kash Patel and Dan Bongino on the hunt for Epstein, which is probably a topic we'll discuss later, and RFK on the quest against glyphosate and vaccines. And it just boggles the mind that each one of these men, who I thought were great men, and maybe some degree something will reveal itself in the future that showed why they made these decisions. But as it stands now, like you said, they not only did take the volume out of these issues, but they totally 180 them. It's not as simple as, well, that I thought that was more important, or yeah, I'll get around to it. But it's the exact opposite of what they've said in many cases. Oh, there's no evidence here, or no, this isn't as unhealthy as we thought.
Yeah. I think the word betrayal come up in one of you guys' description, and I think that's more than adequate for Trump. I think Kennedy at least has given the appearance of still being opposed to the glyphosate being used, which I think more commonly referred to as Roundup might catch everybody's attention a little bit more if we use that as something one of the over the shelf chemicals that you could readily buy, spray it around your yard on your plants, or whatever. And the other point I wanted to make related to that, and I don't want to be a broken record, but again, I think there's an effort to depopulate the planet, and certainly America is one of the ones that they need to depopulate to get out of the way and keep us feuding amongst ourselves, and maybe kill off the ones that are proving to be a little bit more troublesome than what they wanted. And I think, as you mentioned, this stuff's throughout our food supply. It's used on the industrially harvested crops. It's used all over and everything, and therefore it's in the water table, and it's proven to cause cancers all over. Is this part of the effort to help depopulate the planet and depopulate this country in particular? To me, it just seems like that's the theme that's running through several of these points we've been talking about.
Yeah, it's certainly not boosting it.
No.
Yeah.
No,
yeah.
It's not.
Well, the thing I think that people don't understand about glyphosate that I think is just important before we move off this one is that, we talked a lot of people spoke out about the COVID vaccine because we were being coerced into something that we believed could potentially do our body harm. The issue with glyphosate is that we are skipping the coercion. We don't get to consent to it. It is in everything and on everything that we consume, and it is directly tied to cancer, to autism, to infertility, to autoimmune, which our country is completely plagued with. It's like 50% of people have some sort of autoimmune, not even thinking about all the other things I mentioned. So it's a real problem that is directly impacting all of us, and we don't get the opportunity to say no ever, which is beyond alarming. But the last thing I wanted to say on this one, Farm Bill HR 7567 is one that is currently being discussed. I think it's something that's actually happening kind of state by state, but this is another pesticide liability shield. So this is one that people are pushing really hard right now, especially after the executive order came out about glyphosate that would basically stop us from being able to do anything about these things when we are affected. So just kind of something to keep in mind and keep your ear to the ground on.
Yeah, it just made me want to mention another point, and we have called upon it many times over the last 100 and some episodes, is, again, folks, remember, states are not subject to federal direction, and this was proven in the Mack and Prince versus U.S. case at the Supreme Court, that states are not subject to federal direction. If it is not one of those specific delegations, your state doesn't have to tolerate something that is not federally delegated, which this simply is not. So if you can get your state to stand up, you can provide that shield. And the case in point would be DeSantis down there on the chemtrail thing. A lot of people still poo-pooing that whole idea, but the governor of the state of Florida comes out and made state mandates reducing or eliminating the chemtrail distribution over that area. So again, your states can stand up. You got to get a hold of your state level legislators. They are completely within their bounds to stand up and tell the federal government to go pound sand. And this is maybe one of those instances where it could be applied.
Yeah.
Okay,
all right, what else you got for us?
I'm going to throw out Ukraine next. Ukraine, what do you think about Ukraine?
The Ukrainian conflict, in my understanding, has always been a long drawn up plan by the CIA and various directors as a jumping off point to finally, they publicly say, we want a strategic military defeat of Russia. And what they really want is a separation of Russia into several smaller states that they can then incorporate into Europe altogether, because the Western European elite have no say in the functions of Russia as it stands right now. That's why they're our big paper tiger, even though most of the time, in most negotiations, all they ever do is offer their open hand and we spit on it. That is the primary reason for this conflict. I think the primary reason you see the unfocusing upon this conflict, what will probably fizzle out into a continuous war, a continuous or special military operation, and probably another 10 years of an unmoving no man's land and battle line, is mostly because Trump won the election, and this is not a priority of the Zionist elite. So because the Western European elite had this as their chief goal, it's largely getting a back burner because Kamala Harris did not win the election, and George Soros and many of the other very influential people in Europe are not getting the American support that they so desperately need to get any action, especially militarily, accomplished.
Bree?
Yeah. No, you go.
Well, so, one of the things I always threatened to do when the whole Ukraine thing flared up, which oddly enough was just weeks after Afghanistan wound down and we left $10 billion worth of stuff sitting around over there for the next future war in that part of the world. But one of the things I said almost from the very beginning is, I want to get a Russian flag and put it in the back of my truck and drive around with that in the back of my truck when all these Ukraine flags were popping up all over it just showed to me how gullible, how uninformed, and how lemming-like the majority of this country is. They didn't even have an understanding, number one, that we made a treaty and turned around and broke it the next day and continued to march toward Russia after breaking that treaty with our lines and coaxed them into a situation. And in my estimation at that point in time, Putin was the only man on the global stage that was standing up for his country without causing a war. And we were over there promoting these very things. And there's all kind of other nefarious stories coming out of there about the adrenochrome and biological chemical plants and all these other things that were in there that we had to get in there and protect or get rid of before the world became aware of them. So we got to start recognizing that it's the people within this country under the tutelage of these global elites that are pushing for these type of conflicts. And we got to get our head out of our ass and take a different stance. But to have 2/3 or 3/4 of the country stand up and start waving yellow and blue flags, it just made me want to pull my hair out.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I don't have a whole lot to add on this one anymore. I feel like, to Andy's point, it has kind of taken a back burner in more ways than one. And it's just another thing that it is so hard to wrap your head around. But to a certain degree, there's so much that goes on at this level of the global ruling class that, as much as we think we know, like, why they're pulling these strings when they are, I don't know if we can ever really say. But we did talk about it not too long ago that the more that comes out with the Epstein files and everything else, the more you look at Putin with a much less critical eye. And you start to think there's a lot more to this. And, the reason that they've painted him to be such a villain is probably different than what maybe we originally thought. So, I guess just interested to see, where that all falls, where those chips fall as the rest of this potential world war comes to a head. But yeah, that's kind of all I got on that one.
Okay. I got one that just occurred to me I don't even have on my list, and I want to see how everybody reacts to this. So it's not one word, but I think you'll get the point. How about these they call them narco-vessels that were blasted out of the water? What's your opinion on that, Andy?
Well, it's no secret that drugs have been smuggled into America from South America for quite some time. The blasting process that we have undergone and probably are still administering to these vessels coming across largely stems directly back to Pete Hegseth's big speech to the generals. I forget what how long ago that was, but he flat out said that the old rules of engagement no longer apply to us. We need to strike hard and fast, and I think they demonstrated that that's exactly what they plan to do on these uh, drug smuggling vessels, probably largely to protect their own drug smuggling vessels that are U.S. sanctioned. I have my doubts that they truly care about these drugs coming into the country, given all the history of drug selling done by various secret organizations within the United States to fund black budgets, because that money is not on any records because it's acquired illegally. And there have been many prominent figures to accuse our government of selling drugs. Uh, so it's once again another circus event to probably make people feel good. Look at the drug dealers getting whacked right out there on the sea. Mm-hmm. Isn't that so nice? But it's never as virtuous as you think, and obviously the violations of the, when we fought the Japanese, they shot American in World War II. They were shooting American soldiers in the water, and we came to the determination after that war that if you were in the water, you were out of the fight. And yet here we are once again having that, probably going to relitigate that conversation in our own country as to whether a man, if he's selling drugs because he's in the water, he's still in the fight. I'm not sure what the legal battle will be there, but they're ready to take it up, I guess.
Well, I'm glad you brought that point up. To me, this is wrong on so many levels. Number one, this goes completely against everything that this country was founded on. There is no effort to bring anybody to justice. We're going to determine that this is what this boat's doing, and then we're just going to exterminate those people. And if they happen to be still floating around in the water, we're going to come back with a second pass. This is so wrong on so many levels. First of all, when Hegseth kicked this thing off, he said, we know who they are, we know where they're coming from, we know where they're going. If that is the case, then why aren't you waiting at the 12-mile marker off the seaboard, and when they enter U.S. waters, you apprehend them and you bring them to justice? They wanted to put on a show. They wanted to be out there, and that's all it is, as you mentioned at the beginning of your piece. It's a show. It's a feel-good thing for those that are too dumbed down by the propaganda to accept that this is absolutely intolerable, it's inhumane, and it is not the way that American justice system is supposed to work. You can declare all the wars you want. It's not a warring nation. It are individuals, and how do we know that they don't have a woman and child on that boat with them? That's what they'd be doing in the Middle East or other places around the world. They'd be having human shields. Are we still just going to blow that boat out of the water? This is wrong on every level, and the people that are standing up and cheering for it have got their blinders on. They just simply are not recognizing that what happens if you are out in the sea and you're speeding across the ocean off at one of these islands someplace, and you get vaporized out in the middle of the sea. It's completely unacceptable. It's completely unconstitutional. It's unlawful by our laws and by international laws. Should absolutely not be going on.
Yeah. Well, obviously we could go down the whole very, very deep rabbit hole of what Andy brought up, which is that in truth, we're probably just protecting our own drug supply. It's kind of like you got one drug dealer in town, another comes into town, and the gangbangers are going to go and run them out of town because there can only be one drug dealer in town. Like, that's us. That's the U.S. government, which is a pretty terrible thought, and we don't need to go down that any further, but we could certainly do that. But, I think going back into the other points that you brought up there, this is exactly like what I said. I saw that guy say on Fox News. It's all a farce. It's a forced revitalization of American patriotism. I think they know they lost us. I think they know that we are not the rah, 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 America can do no wrong like we were 25 years ago. And now they're trying so hard to put on these shows of force, thinking that the American people are just going to back them blindly without looking into what is really behind that. And that's not the case anymore. It's not. We're way too aware and way too informed and way too connected with people around the globe now that they do not have that pull on us like they once did.
I'm glad you brought that up. Once again, I think it makes such a difference to have a couple of younger folks on here, because I can tell you that the majority of my generation, once again, this is one of those head fakes that they're cheering for. It's pathetic, but that's all the deeper understanding. They don't want us to put any more effort into looking into it or trying to make sense of using American justice as the backdrop. Why don't you just use the American justice system as the backdrop? You don't have to look very further. At what point did we deem ourselves judge, jury, and executioner? That is not what is supposed to be happening. But there is still a large group of people, let's say the 50 plus, that are in maybe decision making capacities that still go along with this. So the time cannot come quick enough where your generation that is more aware, because of the ability to communicate, because of the ability to share ideas with people around the world, and because of your willingness and opportunity to do those things, you're better and more informed. I think that day cannot come quick enough where we have people that are a little more clear-eyed about what's going on start taking the reins on some of these things. Okay, good on that one. How about the SAVE Act?
I have to admit, I'm not familiar with this one. I'm a comment if one of you start off.
All right. Bree, you want to touch on the SAVE Act?
Yeah, so Andy, I think you'll know it once we talk about it a little. It's basically the Voter Identification Act they've been trying to pass that, everyone on the left is saying is a direct affront to married women and elderly people who don't have access to a passport or things like this. This is basically where you would need it'd be kind of like, when you apply for a job and you need either one thing from this column or you need two things from this column. It's basically just saying you need those same things to vote. And I believe that it passed the House. Is that right, Dad?
Yes.
So, okay. So it's on the right track to come to fruition. There's a lot of people who claim to be against it. Pops has brought up a statistic the last several episodes that it's 75% of Americans are in favor of it or something?
No, it's between 85 and 89% of the Americans are in favor of some kind of voter identification. And this was our wonderful Congress's attempt to get that passed. So our point was, over the last couple episodes, if 85% of the people in this country are in favor of it, why is there a debate going on in Congress? They're talking about breaking the filibuster rule, which means you have to have 60 votes in the Senate, which they know they're not going to get. So why, if 85% or higher of the people in this country are in favor of something, why are we stumbling all over ourselves down in D.C. about getting this passed? And our point was in previous episodes that somebody else is really who they're working for, because they sure as hell aren't working for us.
Certainly big money then at that point. I mean, I've known about this issue for quite some time. I used to laugh at the videos showing the poor brainwashed college kids coming out and saying, Black people don't have access to computers and probably couldn't even get an ID. And then you go to the Black people and say, do you have an ID? Yeah, of course I do.
Yeah.
Do you know how to use a computer? I go down to the library all the time and use a computer.
Yeah.
These people are nuts.
Yep.
And this has obviously been some type of fabricated issue, probably drawn up by some egghead, many years back before our time, in order to voice some sort of grand agenda. What it would be, I've heard before that the illegal vote supposedly could clinch Democrat control over the United States government for some time to come. Although there does not seem to be much evidence to me that a majority of these immigrants that move to America come from very conservative countries, but they seem to think that they could guarantee their rulership of America by guaranteeing illegal votes into our system. And more accurately, it would probably just be a great scapegoat if there were discrepancies within our voting system to say, well, we let everybody vote, so if the numbers don't really add up, you're not going to be able to count them all and figure out where they come from. So ballot dumping and all manner of spy tomfoolery could probably be administered without much recourse. That's probably the ultimate goal of trying to see it enacted. And I'm sure both sides would be very happy with that, though they always take in consideration sometimes the opinion of the public on certain issues to not overstep their bounds. They always want to push you to the edge of what you'll accept. Will you eat, this rotten carcass? Will you eat this dog turd? Okay, not the dog turd. They always want to take you to that point of the absolute worst you'll accept, and then when they realize that you're going to vomit, they pull back. So this might be one of those issues where for a long time they tried to force it down our throats, and they realized it's not going to go, so they might as well save themselves some face and put their old hero cape on and strut about through Congress and say, look at the good thing we did for you, even though they probably were the ones that drew it up.
Of course. Well, the big thing I wanted, and we have in previous episodes, to try to bring up to people is that this is the clear indication. This one and the immigration issue, 70% on the immigration issue and 85% on the voter ID issue are in favor in this country, and we're still down there stepping on ourselves and not pushing them through. So everybody know when you hear us say every single one of those people need to be thrown out, this is why. Because 85% of the people are in favor of something and we still can't get it passed. That's obvious they're not working for us. The other thing I'd like to mention, we've mentioned it before, is Thomas Jefferson or Alexander Hamilton. One of those guys mentioned that the republic will last until people realize they can vote themselves gifts from the public treasury. Then they will always elect the candidates for the most gifts. So are there forces that are pushing to give people stuff to control the vote? Absolutely. It's gone on for 150 years. But the underlying issue that I will continue to point to is they're not listening to us. They don't work for us. And that's what everybody needs to wake up to and commit yourself to putting somebody else in that has never been down there before, because we cannot possibly do any worse.
That's exactly what I said to my coworker. I will take the most radical, unaffiliated political person. I don't care what side of the aisle come from, as long as you guarantee me you're going to get in there and start knocking down walls. That's doing us a lot of good, because every wall they tend to knock down is one that's keeping you in prison.
Yep.
The issues largely don't matter to me. I mean, you need independence in those positions, and you have to support them. And that might be one of the things we're called to do in the future as this country progresses, more than likely, into a more tyrannical state. As you said earlier tonight, Bree, how what was that quote by George Orwell? Once the how did that go? It was basically, once the propaganda fades, they must lean more into force.
Yep. When the propaganda no longer works. Yeah. Well, we're burning through an hour real quick here. I got a couple other ones I want to touch on. How about chemtrails?
Chemtrails. Well, the latest discovery I had on that was James O'Keefe his big busting into the meeting at Davos, where he had a informant in there with a mic, quite frankly talk with a fellow who was a private contractor for the United States government in dumping aluminum into our stratosphere in order to reflect. And actually, they've published the DOD, or not the DOD, but the government has published studies on doing this in the past, where they dump large amounts of aluminum into our atmosphere in an attempt to, plug our hole in the ozone, or
or fill our heads with aluminum.
To fight off the sun's vicious rays. And of course, it shouldn't be any surprise that when people with large amounts of dementia have increased amounts of aluminum in their head, whether they say that's naturally occurring or foreignly or acquired down the road, I'm not sure, but it is a fact that people with dementia tend to have higher levels of aluminum floating around in their brain.
Yeah.
But in truth, we've been dumping all kinds of nasty things into our atmosphere for a long time. I encourage anybody that wants to get more pissed off about the CIA to look up some of their disclosed programs, such as one out west where they dumped large amounts of radioactive iodine over a few towns in Oregon to just see what happens. And that is a part of one of the programs that they had publicly disclosed as a statute of limitations thing. And I remember reading that in high school and thoroughly getting soured to trusting our government, seeing at least that was one, that they had one breach of our freedoms and liberty that they had conducted for whatever their purposes were to do it. I mean,
yeah.
So this again to me makes a very obvious separation between generations. Most of my generations are still poo-pooing the whole idea of chemtrails. That's the truth. They think this is one of the tin hat conspiracy theory, even though you do not have to look very far at all to have all kind of information, such as Andy just disclosed, about some of these things that have gone on and continue to go on. But I think they've gotten by because, and you brought up a good point about the next generation's already aware of this stuff and ready to take action about, because mine was not. So it was very easy to continue these programs when simply people were not believing that they were going on. So it makes their life a whole lot easier because there's no political pressure to fix anything, because the majority of folks in my age group simply didn't believe that it was even going on. So a couple other points on that, as you mentioned, I think there are many diseases, not only the one that Andy mentioned, that may be attributed to some of the things that are being dumped. This stuff is into the ground, it's into the water, it's into your skin. It's being absorbed, and we are being affected by it. Here it is, man playing God, doing all these kind of things, and we don't even understand all the repercussions, or maybe they do, and they want those things to occur. As many of these other issues that we talked about tonight, I simply go back to what I continue to hold on to as a core belief, is that there is a small group of people that wants to exterminate about half the population or more.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. It's always weird when I hear you say something like, oh, my generation still thinks this is like fully tin hat type talk. And I know that's true, but from my perspective, it seems like everyone knows this is real now. And I guess the only thing that I would add to this point is that that's a silver lining. Maybe it's too late for your generation to understand the realities of this, but for Andy and I think we can both say that, many, many, many more people are fully just discussing this in like normal life. This isn't something that's even weird anymore. And I don't know, a little more than a year ago, it was still very much considered a conspiracy theory by many. But now I feel like I know all sorts of people across the political spectrum, I mean, unrelated to politics, that are like, oh yeah, of course they're real. So there is change happening, and sometimes it comes through something like this. But it's opening the door to seeing the truth and to understanding why. Okay, well, now I know that's real, but why is it real? When you start looking into that, you start to understand the bigger picture. So that awakening is happening. We're in the midst of it, but it's a slow go, especially when you've been aware for a while. It's like, okay, I'm ready. Let's get the thing moving.
It all moves very slowly. That is for certain.
Generational, and I think that's what's being made evident here tonight, just a variation in how generations are looking at it. And we always said since we began this podcast, if we're going to save this sinking ship, which it is, the energy is going to come from the young people. And the first thing that you have to do is recognize that there is a problem. So if the younger generation are recognizing that there's a problem, that first step is already taken. What we never could accomplish was when we stood on the courthouse steps and we stood on the Capitol steps in D.C. and the Capitol steps in Washington, is we could not get the majority of our generation to believe that most of this stuff was going on. Therefore, there simply was no action. But if your generation is already recognizing that these things are going on, that is the very first step to causing something to change. So I'm hopeful for that. I'm just very disappointed and will continue to always be about my generation. And we simply sat on our hands and watch football games and the Grammy Awards. This is what fills people's heads. So I know we're up on an hour. I got to get one more in. I'm going to skip over a couple, but I want to get Andy's opinion on Epstein.
Epstein. From all my research into him, it seems to indicate that he was a access agent for both the United States and Israel. I think great men that have met him and have kind of, I believe, probably know more about him than they let on, because he was, and probably is, if you believe he's still alive like I do, is such a very influential character in our nation's history, and the group he represented, a very large, influential group, that how do I want to say this? It's going to be very hard for people to grasp how deep his tendrils went, the levels of depravity that things were taken and done by him, the amount of good people that they believed that were influenced by him. Like I was saying, his purpose, which was obviously created by our government to do the nasty things that they believe has to be done at the end of the day. There always has to be some ultimate force that will always guarantee a result, and he was that ultimate dark force that guaranteed that what we wanted to occur would occur. There's no negotiations, and I'm curious actually to see what you guys think of him at the moment.
Go ahead, Bree.
Yeah, well, I'm right there with you. I tend to agree that I do think he is still alive. And because of exactly that, he is such a critical component of so many different pieces to this puzzle that ultimately is tied to this global ruling class that we've talked so much about. I mean, so much of the things that have happened through the course of our history as a country, but also just global history over, call it the last 30 years, have been directly tied to these same groups and influenced by these same groups in some capacity, all of which are detrimental to we the people, all of which are detrimental to the would-be slave class, all of which seem to be part of building that prison for all of us. There's a blackmail component there, but why? Obviously, to get people to move the way you wanted them to move. Okay, but why? Because there are bigger people behind the scenes than the people who are listed in these files. Yeah, they did terrible things. These are the names that keep popping up. Yeah, they're involved, but why? Who's behind them? Who wanted them to be controlled? And that's the piece that nobody's really talking about as we're talking about these arrests. Cool, great, let's arrest them all. The problem isn't going to go away because the problem isn't the people in the files. It's the people controlling the people in the files.
Right.
And somebody was controlling Epstein. Somebody was Epstein's handler. And that's where we need to all be directing our attention. So absolutely, I'm with you. He's still alive. I think it's alarming and concerning how deeply embedded he was in so many aspects of American infrastructure, American finance. I mean, the list goes on. So there are a lot of pieces, I think, yet to be discovered as to how deep this all runs. But I mean, I personally believe it's all demonic entities that are trying to take control of the global population.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. I mean, the black magic aspect of his, some of the darker portions that are coming out are stark. And I think that'll be a hard pill for the average person to swallow when more of these files come out. I really do believe that they think it is a matter, the good men and women that are involved in this, because I don't think everybody that covers this up is doing it out of a place of protecting the elite. I think there are many people out there that are involved in how these files make their way out to the public that are truly scared of the showing the average person the depths of darkness that are looming in high places. Mm-hmm. And that's the only justification I can come up with why such good men like Dan and Cash were before they went into their positions to take such grand 180s once they saw those files. It's the same reason why when I watch, people that truly go up the UFO rabbit hole, when they get to the top and they talk to men that have the answers. They 100% know they have the answers, but they don't know what they are. And they ask these men, can you tell us? And they just flat out tell them, like, I can't. I don't believe I should. Morally, mm-hmm. I don't believe I should. Mm-hmm. So I'm not totally disgusted by the way these things have turned out, but there will undoubtedly be more to come out of this. And I think this will be another one that will be a very slow moving ball, mm-hmm. where will you ever get the whole answer? Probably not. Will you get more than you probably thought you would bargain for when you get the whole or most of the enchilada with this topic? Undoubtedly. Mm-hmm. Undoubtedly. I think we're still just barely scratching the surface of what this group participated in and the reasons that they did it. So,
mm-hmm. I think everybody should be alarmed and be demanding full disclosure when you think about every global event and domestic event in the last 30 years has direct connection to somebody who's been mentioned with being involved with Epstein. Whether the sexual stuff is part of that or not, they've been involved with a central figure. We should all be alarmed at that. Then when you hear such things as him being part of the Mossad and part of the CIA and all the rest of it, you recognize that he's a facilitator, as you guys both have mentioned, to make things happen and to get things done that are all behind closed doors. And we are supposed to be the republic in the eyes of the public. We are supposed to be governed in the eyes of the public, and we simply are not. When you have somebody not only involved with the filth and rot that he's being accused of, but he has connection to people who were directly involved with every significant event in the last 30 years. That should be extremely alarming to people, and everybody should have an appetite for full disclosure, no matter how hard it is to swallow what that filth is behind it. Mm-hmm. And we burned up an hour and probably 10 minutes here in short order. I think that was a great way to break in our new featured product for the show, which we're going to call the Ricochet Round. Andy, you did a nice job. It was great having you on the show tonight. I'd like to have you back sometime, and we'll talk about some other events as they're taking place, or maybe some things that you're specifically interested in. Bree, anything else?
No, I don't think so. We went through it fast. Thank you for being our guinea pig for that. I knew you would be all queued up on all the subject matter, and you were. So it was great to kind of run through a lot of different topics. But yeah, Dad, like you said, I think it'd be great to, have you come back and we'll let you take the reins and you decide what the topic is, and we'll go from there, because lots of fun conversations could certainly have been had with any of the topics that we covered tonight. I mean, all of those things you could do a whole show and then some on. So it was good.
And the other good news is, with a young guy on who has a new circle of contacts, certainly you may have friends within your group of that you interact with, that maybe we can have somebody else on, or maybe have a couple of you on, and we can take this message further, because again, the energy to fix this righting ship is going to come from the young people. And if there's more out there becoming engaged, becoming interested in these topics, that is the key to fixing the mess that we're in.
You're absolutely right.
Okay, I usually close with a Bible verse. And tonight, my verse is, wisdom is supreme. Therefore, get wisdom. Though it cost you all you have, get understanding. And I hope that ties in nicely with some of the things we talked about tonight. That comes from Proverbs 4, verse 7.
Perfect. Yeah, great. Thank you for that. Thank you again, Andy. It was good conversation, even though it's all kind of bad stuff. But that's the fourth box.
Hey, so we could talk about good stuff too. peaceful ways to fight all this localization. We can, well, maybe next time we'll spin it around the other way and try to
That'd be good.
find good stories and good avenues and next steps people can take in order to peacefully combat some of this nastiness.
I like it.
Yeah. Amen. For sure. That's what it's all about. So with that, everybody, don't forget to give us a like, a follow, a subscribe, comment, rate, share, whatever you want to do, wherever you're watching. We appreciate any and all of it. With that, until next week, stay vigilant.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you so much for listening. We really do appreciate the support and truly love getting to share this message with anyone who wants or needs it. The best way for you to support the show is to subscribe, add a rating, and share with everyone you know. You can find us on Instagram, X, and at thefourthbox.com. We'll see you next Thursday at 6 p.m. Stay vigilant.